In a major diplomatic and economic breakthrough, India and the United States have unveiled an interim framework towards a broader bilateral trade deal. Now, this comes after US President Donald Trump announced a trade deal with India and reduced tariffs on India from 50% to now 18%. The trade deal is expected to be formally signed by mid-March. Now, the US has also scrapped the additional 25% tariffs on India over the purchase of Russian oil. Now, this is a major win for India, with crucial sectors such as agriculture, dairy protected, while the move also opens up a $30 trillion market for Indian exporters, especially for farmers and fishermen. Now, in return, India has agreed to purchase up to $500 billion worth of US goods over the next 5 years from energy, aircraft, tech and industrial products. This is a major commitment by New Delhi, which it says reflects growing demand, not investment pledges. Now, India is also preparing a 3-tier tariff reduction on US imports, granting zero duty access in many sectors, phased quota cuts and protecting sensitive staples like dairy and agriculture. We continue to have our top editors and correspondents as well as experts joining us on the broadcast to help us decode this framework. We have Vishnu Som with us. Vishnu, help us decode this crucial framework. It's quite a detailed statement made by the United States and India.
It is indeed very detailed, and this is an interim agreement which we are talking about at this stage. The Big Bang mega agreement is still to arrive. However, I think this is a very important consolidation of the process that we've seen over the last period of time, where we expect India and the US to actually get it all together. And what this would actually mean is lakhs of jobs for people here in India. There are lots of queries and questions which are being asked. Are Indian farmers being protected enough? Is Indian agriculture being protected enough? Is Indian dairy being protected enough? There have been some answers already from the Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal that our core interests are being protected. But there is a sense that all of this is going through because of India no longer being in a position to import Russian oil. That appears to be, part of the agreement which has been arrived at. So, Ronak Desai with us, Aditya Raj Kaul, my colleague Priyanka as well with us. Ronak, the big picture first. Is this itself is not the deal, it's an interim sort of arrangement. What is the potential of what's been put on the table?
Sure, no, and thanks for having me. So as you rightfully point out, Vishnu, this is an interim deal, but I think it very much represents an important first step to a more comprehensive agreement. Given the very pronounced and serious trade frictions that had afflicted the bilateral for the last 6, 7, 8 months, this was a much needed, I think, first step in a situation in which, the relationship was entering into an increasingly unsustainable phase. I think the potential here is quite large. Of course, this is about, gradually reducing the tariff schedule down. This is about non-tariff barriers as well. And as the joint statement makes expressly clear, this is also about aligning the two countries more closely together on economic security. So from those different dimensions, I think the potential is quite profound. There's obviously a lot of work to be done, though, ahead. And the devil, of course, as we all know, are in the details.
Aditya, the devil is in the details. One of the details, of course, has to do with India's import of Russian oils. Now, Russian oil, there is an executive order which Trump announced, which says that, look, this is all being done with the assumption that India will stop the import of Russian oil. And if India goes back to importing Russian oil, there would again be, sanctions on India, tariffs on India. What is that part of the announcement that's coming?
Well, there's been an executive order, Vishnu, that was signed minutes before this joint statement came out. And that executive order says that the Russian oil is the key. In this case, 25% tariffs that were imposed additionally on India in August last year have been taken back. But this is with the assurance from the Indian government. It says that it will not indulge in buying Russian oil anymore. It will stop it completely and then diversify into buying American oil and Venezuelan oil as well over the next few years. It also says that there's a commitment of a defense cooperation over the next 10 years as well. So we haven't heard from the Indian government in detail about it. As you said, we are awaiting these details, but this is one of the clinchers, but also one of the big question marks. Already we've seen domestically here in India a big political debate. The opposition and the Congress party trying to corner the government on the US-India trade deal. Since morning, we've seen comments coming in from Manish Tiwari, Priyanka Chaturvedi, and several others on this front as well. And we'll have to wait and see whether there would be some clarity from the Commerce Ministry or the External Affairs Ministry or the Oil and Gas Ministry on this particular front. They have been tight-lipped on this. But what India has said essentially over the last 4 years is about strategic autonomy, is also about pricing point of view, and our energy sourcing is completely dependent on how is the pricing, the best prices that we get, and what is important and essential for India. Will that continue is the big question mark, because this is not just about the Russian oil now. We've also had an executive order just minutes ago from Donald Trump, which says that on the Iran front, if you continue to trade with Iran, then there would be additional 25% tariffs. So all the countries who are trading with Iran will have that tariff. So that could also be a big a diplomatic shift, because India's interest in the Chabahar port and other trades that are continuing. I had a chat with the Iranian ambassador who said that we haven't heard officially from India, but this is going to be a big headache for India. It's not just restricted to Russian oil. Apart from that, yes, it's a big market access that we are talking about, Vishnu. We are talking about textiles and leather that will essentially have much lesser duty. Also, in the drugs fair, in the pharma sector, and gems and diamonds, we'll have a big win-win. So diplomatically and otherwise, when commerce is concerned, I think it's going to help exporters in a massive manner. But Russian oil is the big question mark right now.
I think that's important that you mention it, because on the one hand, there is sound economics, and this trade deal opens up so many opportunities. And yet, from a policy standpoint, India will have to walk a bit of a tightrope, given the equation with Russia, which remains very, very central to our foreign policy. Priyanka, come in on that, and let's talk a little bit more about oil. The sense is that India is going to be importing oil from Venezuela. All right, sorry, we've got some breaking news now coming in. The External Affairs Minister has hailed the India-US deal will mutually benefit India-US trade partners, is what he has said. Let's just see what other details we can do. We can check out at this stage in terms of what Dr. Jaishankar has said. He's hailed the interim deal will mutually benefit India-US as trade partners. He's been in the US, remember, in just the last little while, but he's the latest minister to actually praise various aspects of this deal. Before I come to you, Priyanka, just for the benefit of our viewers, what exactly is it that we are looking at? Because the specifics are important. So here's what it is. Gains for Indian exports are in textile and apparel, leather and footwear, plastic and rubber, certain machinery, organic chemicals, home decor, and artisanal products. Eventually, once tariffs for Indian goods are removed from certain other areas, we'd be looking at generic pharmaceuticals, aircraft parts, gems, and diamonds. So those are a couple of areas. Now, Priyanka, to the point on oil, how do you believe a lot of this is premised on India's oil imports?
The United States has been reshaping its sort of economic tools to influence global oil trade beyond just direct imports, right? So in recent actions, including executive orders as well as tariff policy, Washington has signaled that it may use economic measures like tariffs tied to oil sourcing to discourage continued purchases of Russian crude. This reflects US concerns about how discounted Russian oil revenue could sustain Moscow's economy in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war, even though tariffs and secondary tariff authorities are complex and tailored rather than blanket bans. Now, for India, as you said before, energy policy has become a balancing act. India is one of the world's largest oil importers and has previously sourced significant volumes of discounted Russian oil to help keep energy affordable for both the economy as well as Indian citizens. So in early 2025 and 2026, Indian Russian crude imports have already shown signs of decline amid global price shifts and policy pressure, even as PM Modi has emphasized that energy security remains its top priority, and decisions on oil sources are guided by commercial viability and national interest rather than external pressure or tariff negotiations. So at the same time, I feel that India is going to explore a broader mix of suppliers. It has resumed discussions that Venezuelan crude, which it used to import before sanctions were tightened, and is open to also the commercial merits of such supplies if they fit India's refining needs and cost constraints. And also, I'd like to add that stockpiles of Venezuelan oil and changes in US sanctions policy have absolutely reopened that possibility, while India also continues to source from the Middle East, the United States, as well as other markets. So the bigger picture is this, that India is trying to navigate between energy affordability, diversified supply, as well as international economic signals, walking sort of a policy tightrope in effect, while the US is framing trade and energy policy together as part of broader economic strategy. So that's what's really happening here. And I'm curious to see the final result. I guess we're all curious.
All right, Peter McGuire, CEO of Trading.com Australia, joins us. Well, Peter, thanks very much for being with us. Your initial thoughts on this fairly expansive interim statement, interim deal, which has been arrived at. It's a joint statement towards a larger deal, which is yet to happen. But I think we have an idea of the broad contour of what both countries want. How do you see it?
Well, I do see it in the sense of there is a peace deal in the sense of where President Trump was and naturally where Prime Minister Modi, the situation with Russia. Moving forward, I would suggest that this is the strategy that President Trump is after. He wants to be the deal maker, not only for rare earths, not only for crude, but really for crypto, for everything across the planet. And this is just the starting phase. And he has been able to secure, naturally, the storyline with Venezuela and how that's going to impact. And naturally, another part of the strategy is to make that non-existent, the Ukraine-Russia war. So this is where he's penalising Russia. He's naturally going to the next step, and there is a fallout of that, naturally, from the likes of India to buy cheaper oil. And he believes that he'll be able to boost production and cut price. And that's going to be beneficial to the likes of India in the long run. So this is very much a work in progress. How it unpacks, I can't see there being a spike in oil in the short term. You're currently sitting at 68 for Brent and around at 63.5 for WTI. I know that the markets are shut, but I don't expect there to be, a $3 or $5 premium built into Monday morning Asia trade. So we'll just see how that moves. But again, it's it's exciting and it's good.
All right, we've got a tweet from Prime Minister Modi just now. I'm reading it out. We've agreed on a framework for an interim trade agreement between our two great nations. I thank President Trump for his personal commitment to robust ties between our countries. The framework reflects the growing depth, trust, and dynamism of our partnership. It strengthens Make in India by opening new opportunities for India's hardworking farmers, entrepreneurs, MSMEs, startup innovators, fishermen, and more. It'll generate large-scale employment for women and young people. India and the US share a commitment to promoting innovation, and this framework will further deepen investment and technology partnerships between us. The framework will also strengthen resilient and trusted supply chains and contribute to global growth. As India moves forward towards building a Viksit Bharat, we remain committed to building global partnerships that are future-oriented, empower our people, and contribute to shared prosperity. So it is interesting what the Prime Minister has said. There is no reference to oil, not that one would expect that to be the case, because India has been talking up in a very big way what this deal actually brings. And I'm just going to bring in a couple of other points, because one of the aspects was that $500 billion of trade to India, between India and the US in a finite period of time. How is that going to actually take place? We've got a little bit more detail. Part of it is going to be the effort at boosting digital India, the goal being to strengthen India's digital infrastructure. What are we looking at? Quicker access to US information and communication technology, which would mean a big push to setting up data centers. We've already seen a huge investment by Google. The strengthening of the electronics and semiconductor value chain, a huge support to domestic manufacturing. Consumers would benefit with reduced costs, and several MSMEs and startups will gain through job creation. So two parallel tracks, job creation here in India and boosting digital India as well. There's also a 10-year defense pact. And Aditya, why don't you come in on this? The defense pact or equation between India and the US is already legal. It's already based on several foundational agreements. And therefore, India and the US taking it forward by 10 years just adds on what has already been in place for a while now, right?
Well, that's right, Vishnu. We've had a 20-year-old strategic partnership. There was multiple levels of dialogue. I remember the 2+2 dialogue mechanism that had been in place, and there is robust cooperation through different sectors. And what essentially this framework for a trade deal that will happen does is that it creates a win-win situation. It creates a huge market access both in United States and in India. And for Indian exporters, it's a huge boom. It opens a huge $30 trillion market for them. For pharma sector, for gems and stones and diamonds, it's a huge opportunity. There is a massive cut in the tariffs that we are talking about. The defense framework will be a 10-year arrangement, and there could be perhaps technology sharing that we talk about. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been speaking about manufacturing. He's been speaking about Make in India, and that has been a top focus for the last many years. I remember listening to him at Hyderabad House immediately after the India-EU trade deal was announced, and he spoke about manufacturing and how better quality products and mass production will happen here in India. Similarly, after the India-US trade deal as well, look at the auto parts that we are talking about. There's a special legal sanction that has been given, which is very rare for countries. Only a handful perhaps have that, and that is for India. So in that auto parts sector as well, I think manufacturing would be a huge component. And apart from that, apparels, home decor, you talk about textiles, you talked about leather. There's a huge, duty reduction that is really happening. So overall, from 50%, we've come down to 18%. Who knows? Perhaps there are expectations that they could further go down to 15% in the next few months. So that's what we are waiting for. The final blueprint of this entire trade deal that will come out in March. The negotiations are still underway. Remember, this is just a framework and a joint statement of the intent of both these countries to come out. Now, many would assume that, the Russian oil or the Russia-Ukraine war or the India-EU FTA made this happen, but finally we have it here. A lot of this anxiety or the kind of statements that we saw are in the past. There would be certainly a lot of questions that the government will have to answer on the Russian oil front. But Prime Minister Narendra Modi, External Affairs Minister Jai Shankar, and Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal, and finally the Finance Minister cheering this morning this entire FTA that has come out. Domestically speaking, of course, there are a lot of questions that are left unanswered that the government will perhaps answer in the next few days. Because remember, we are also speaking about this deal at a very geopolitically tense moment, Vishnu, which you have covered very, very closely, from Russia-Ukraine war over the last 4 years to massive sanctions on Russia as well as Iran. This is a road that India will have to walk, and this will be a tightrope walk nonetheless. But India has made this happen in the last 10 months, or 5 to 6 FTAs, which is quite significant.
Ronak, joint technology cooperation is inbuilt into the premise of this trade deal. So accelerating India's digital and AI ecosystem, increasing trade in tech products like GPUs and data center equipment, given the recent investments that we've seen, for example, Google, I believe Qualcomm will also be coming in with a very sizable investment. How do you see this joint technology cooperation premised on positioning India as an AI hub as being central to a part of this deal going forward?
Yeah, I mean, part of what we're seeing here is there's an intent and now concrete measures being announced by both governments to keep other dimensions of the bilateral moving forward and to put it on an upward trajectory. Trade historically has been the underperformer of the US-India relationship. It reached its low point again with these tariffs. But I think what both countries are trying to signal is that other areas of cooperation that have traditionally characterized US-India ties, especially now in the AI sector, and this is, for example, an arena that is one that has been, I think, championed by previous US administrations, even before President Trump returned to office. And this is intended to be a very clear message and signal that this is going to ultimately be a very big area and arena of cooperation between the two countries. As much as this is an interim deal and that obviously the tariff reduction or future tariff reduction is garnering most of the headlines, what both countries and the negotiators have done, I think, smartly, is to say, look, other areas of cooperation are continuing forward. This is a relationship that is multidimensional. This is a relationship that spans various, realms of the two countries joining hands. And they very much see, for example, AI cooperation, data centers. These have gotten express mentions inside the joint statement as the future of US-India relations. And that this is an area that both countries and their respective leaders can cultivate, that they can nurture, and that they can see real progress going forward, especially as other parts of the deal and the details surrounding them continue to unfold.
Ultimately, this will open up a $30 trillion market for Indian exporters, MSMEs, farmers, fishermen, so many others, young people, women. That's what the Commerce Minister said. I'm going to go back to Disha in the studio. We've got other news as well coming in, several more reactions.
Right. Welcome back. You're watching The Breakfast Show. Now, staying with our top story, which is the India-US interim trade framework, in a major diplomatic and economic breakthrough, India and the United States have unveiled an interim framework towards a broader bilateral trade deal. Now, this comes after the US President Trump announced a trade deal with India and reduced tariffs on India from 50% to now 18%. Now, this trade deal is expected to be formally signed by mid-March. Now, the US has also scrapped the additional 25% tariffs on India over the purchase of Russian oil. A major win for India, with crucial sectors such as agriculture and dairy protected, while the move opens up a $30 trillion market for Indian exporters, especially for MSMEs, farmers and fishermen. Now, in return, India has agreed to purchase up to $500 billion worth of US goods over the next 5 years from energy, aircrafts, tech and industrial products. Now, this is a commitment that New Delhi says reflects growing demand, not investment pledges. India is also preparing 3-tier tariff reductions on US imports, granting zero duty access in many sectors, phased cuts and protecting sensitive staples like dairy and cereals from any duty opening. Now, let's quickly decode this key interim framework that has been reached between the US and India. Now, US has said that it will cut tariffs on India from 50% to 18%. Now, this is going to be crucial, and essentially this interim trade framework opens up a path to a broader bilateral trade deal now, which is expected to be inked by mid-March. Now, this comes after crucial talks between US President Trump and Prime Minister Modi earlier this week. And it essentially has two aspects. Now, one is, of course, the sectors where India will cut tariffs. Now, India is going to cut tariffs on all US industrial goods as well as certain agricultural products while protecting India's domestic agricultural sector. Now, so what are these agricultural products where India is going to cut tariffs? Now, these include tree nuts, oil, red sorghum, which is used for fertilizers and animal feed, while protecting the domestic agricultural sector. Now, a big win for India will be that US is removing tariffs on textiles, leather, chemicals And also after the trade deal is reached, it will also remove tariffs on pharma, on gems, on aircraft parts. India will also get preferential access for auto parts, a big win and a huge benefit for India's auto sector. Now, on the other side, India will address US concerns on non-tariff barriers, a concern and a friction point that had remained between the US and India, which now India has agreed to address certain concerns that the United States has on non-tariff barriers. India, meanwhile, we have insights into the $500 billion investment that US President Trump had announced in his tweet earlier this week. Now, India plans to invest $500 billion purchases from US in 5 years. Now, in what sectors? This is going to be energy, aircraft parts, tech. Now, this deal, this framework and this eventual deal will deepen strategic ties between India and the US, technological ties, as well as a supply chain alignment. Now, looking at how this India-US trade deal will boost digital India, Make in India. Now, this will give India quicker access to US information and communication technology goods. This is going to be a big push to setting up data centers. Also a crucial focus that we saw in the budget 2026 that was announced. It will also strengthen electronics and semiconductor value chains, a major aspect, especially given the current volatility of global markets. It's also going to be a huge support to domestic manufacturing, with consumers set to benefit with reduced costs, several MSME startups to gain through job creation, and this is going to be a major boost to Make in India. Now, listen into what Vishnu Som, when he spoke to certain experts who helped decode this interim trade agreement.
All right. Well, we've got many more details of this coming in at this stage, but I think the larger picture over here, Disha, is that this is an agreement which will open, according to Piyush Goyal, the Commerce Minister, a $30 trillion market for Indian exporters, especially MSMEs, farmers, fishermen, right? There's a slash on tariffs on Indian goods to 18%. We already knew that was taking place. This means huge market opportunity in sectors such as textiles, apparel, leather, footwear, plastic, rubber products, organic chemicals, etc., etc. Additionally, tariffs will go down to zero, not yet, but they eventually will, on a wide range of goods, including generic pharmaceuticals, gems, diamonds, and aircraft parts. India will get exemptions on aircraft parts, tariff rate quotas on auto parts, and negotiated outcomes on generic pharmaceuticals. So there will be gains there. Now, there have already been opposition concerns which have been stressed this morning on whether enough is being done to protect our core sectors: agriculture, dairy, poultry, farmers. Now, here's a key part of a quote from the Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal on just this. He says, "The agreement reflects India's commitment to safeguarding farmers' interests and sustaining rural livelihoods by completely protecting sensitive agricultural and dairy products, including maize, wheat, rice, soya, poultry, milk, cheese, ethanol, tobacco, certain vegetables, and meat, etc." So, Aditya, just, politically, this is coming up in two ways. I'm almost certain it'll come up in terms of India stopping Russian oil imports. I don't know if the opposition has raised that so far, but Manish Tiwari has raised question marks on whether the interests of our farmers are being protected, the dairy sector. And there is a very clear response from the government that is not being compromised. So that's an important clarification.
Indeed. In fact, if we go through the statements that have come in the last 48 to 72 hours, Vishnu, we've heard Piyush Goyal, the Commerce Minister, do a press conference. He, of course, had to speak in the Parliament. That couldn't happen, so he addressed through media. Later, we also saw the Agriculture Minister, Shivraj Singh Chauhan, assure people that on agriculture, on dairy, on poultry, there is no compromise whatsoever. So these are questions, obviously, that the opposition will ask, because the finer details and nitty-gritties of the deal are still far away, because in March the final deal will come out, and that'll be huge, perhaps into thousands of pages. In this particular case, we have some details that have come out, but since morning, we've seen attacks from Manish Tiwari from the Congress Party to Priyanka Chaturvedi from Shiv Sena UBT, questioning the government and saying that have they succumbed? They're saying that there are questions being asked on the tariff duties of the US products that have completely been slashed in a major way. But this is a give and take. There is a huge relaxation on tariff duties that we have also seen on leather, on textile, on gems and stones and diamonds, as well as the pharma sector, because India is the world's largest provider of the generic medicines and the drugs to the United States. So it will be a huge win when it comes to that as well. On auto parts as well, because Prime Minister's big focus has been manufacturing and make in India. So that is a huge win as well. What are the other factors that are there will be discussed threadbare later. But you are right, Vishnu, that Russian oil question is paramount. Whether we are going to reduce this drastically, there are reports that have emerged in media today here in India that the overall Russian oil purchase has come down from 40% to 25%. So are we already diversifying? Yes, that's the answer. Over the last few months, we've been trying to diversify. There are other, countries that we are looking into. And of course, Venezuela and US could be potentially one of those options that India would be looking into in the next few weeks, because India has done that in the past and won't change when it comes to strategic autonomy and also pricing when it comes to sourcing of either Russian oil or oil from anywhere that benefits the common masses. So a lot of questions, certainly, but they will be answered, I believe, slowly and steadily. One among them is the Russian oil question that perhaps the government will go into the final details in days from now.
Aditya, it's just my personal sense that we shouldn't, none of us should look at the oil import situation as a showstopper. It was always done because of economic prudence. We were getting Russian oil cheap. We have massive economic requirements, energy requirements, and so this was being done. In the last few months, as a result of US sanctions on Russia, additional sanctions on Russia, Russian oil entities became unviable for India and our oil companies to take in Russian oil to refine it and then export it elsewhere and use within our country. That being the case, it was inevitable that India needed to look elsewhere. So people then say that, Trump has gone and done whatever he has in Venezuela, and India is being coerced into buying Venezuelan oil. And I think there was a very important answer to this when the government a couple of days back said that, hang on a second, we have in the past imported oil from Venezuela as well. We maintain offices in Venezuela looking at that as well. And therefore, we stopped the import of Venezuelan oil. Why? Because there were US sanctions in place against Venezuela. Now, if those have gone, and if we get a good price, then we may well go there. Now, that works to America's advantage. So, economic prudence versus policy are the contours of this debate. Those who say policy will say that, you talk about, being partners to many nations, and yet this is what you're doing to Russia. And then there is the economic prudence argument, where you have lakhs of jobs which are going to come onto the table, trillions of dollars, more than $1 trillion of trade eventually between these two huge economies. So I would argue, and let me know your views, that those are the two contours, right? Economic prudence versus policy. How would you look at that?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there are three basic areas that I would sum up. One, it's huge for the exporters here in India. Second, from the strategic point of view, one cannot see this entire deal in isolation. There are geopolitical tensions that have been, engulfing the entire world over the last 4 years. The Russia-Ukraine war, the Israel-Hamas conflict, the connectivity and the supply chains being affected massively. And through that entire process, India has done 9 FTAs. In the last 10 months alone, there have been 5 FTAs from UK to EU to Oman to New Zealand. and the mother of all deals, the India-EU deal just days ago. So there is a confident India, a confident Indian diplomacy that is coming out here. India is diversifying when it comes to trade, when it comes to oil, and strategic autonomy stays there. There have been lectures given to India. There have been, pulls and pressures diplomatically and strategically on India, but India has stood its ground, and India is there when it comes to friends and allies and strategic partners. Look at the India-US relationship. It's been in works for 20 years, the strategic partnership, and here we are. There is, of course, domestic politics and domestic concerns that come out. When it comes to Trump, he's been emphasizing on America first. In India as well, Prime Minister Modi has been looking inwards, whatever benefits the people of India. And I think with this India-US framework that has been arrived at on an interim agreement for a trade deal, there are a lot of win-wins. The biggest of all is the market access, which both exporters here will get. And when it comes to Make in India, Prime Minister's huge effort on manufacturing, his comments over the last few days on how these trade deals are going to impact that immensely. And you're right, bang on, Vishnu, on the Russian oil front, that there were a lot of questions that were raised, but India has stood by, on energy sourcing with the best price that we have got. And we have stood with friends, be it Russia or United States, in spite of geopolitical tensions, in spite of pulls and pressures. So in this particular case, again, we are trying to diversify. Many say that will Russia see it through a very different light? I don't think so. I think we've, stood the test of time, and Russia has understood, US has understood in the past. And this time around also, over the next few weeks, we could see diversification happening wherever we get the best price, could be US and Venezuela. But it will happen in a systematic manner. It will not happen overnight. And perhaps, who knows, the 18% tariff that has been slashed finally after almost 10 months could be further slashed as well.
All right, what we're going to do now is take a look at what Piyush Goyal has recently said in Parliament. He will also be at the NDTV Profit Conclave today, so we should be getting a lot of details, hopefully, from him on what has transpired. But here's what he said in Parliament.
कि दोनों पक्ष अपनी अपनी अर्थव्यवस्थाओं के महत्वपूर्ण और संवेदनशील क्षेत्रों की रक्षा करते हुए सर्वोत्तम संभव परिणाम सुनिश्चित करना चाहेंगे। इन वार्ताओं के दौरान भारतीय पक्ष अपने संवेदनशील क्षेत्रों, विशेषकर कृषि और दुग्ध क्षेत्रों के हितों की रक्षा सुनिश्चित करने में सफल रहा है। अमेरिकी पक्ष के भी कुछ ऐसे क्षेत्र थे जो उनके दृष्टिकोण से संवेदनशील थे। लगभग 1 वर्ष तक चले कई दौर के विचार विमर्श के बाद दोनों वार्ताकार दल द्विपक्षीय व्यापार समझौते के कई क्षेत्रों को अंतिम रूप देने में सफल रहे। खाद्य और कृषि क्षेत्र में भारत की प्रमुख संवेदनशीलता का पूर्णतः ध्यान रखा गया है। साथ ही यह साझेदारी लघु और मध्यम उद्यमी, एमएसएमई उद्यमियों, कुशल श्रमिकों और उद्योग के लिए नए अवसर खोलेगी। उन्नत प्रौद्योगिकियों तक पहुंच का सुगम बनाएगी और भारत के मेक इन इंडिया फॉर द वर्ल्ड, डिजाइन इन इंडिया फॉर द वर्ल्ड और इनोवेट इन इंडिया फॉर द वर्ल्ड के दृष्टिकोण को साकार करने में सहायक होगी। यह ऐतिहासिक ढांचागत समझौता भारत अमेरिका संबंधों को मजबूत करने और विकसित भारत 2047 की दिशा में हमारी यात्रा को आगे बढ़ाने की दिशा में एक महत्वपूर्ण कदम है और यह दुनिया के 2 सबसे बड़े लोकतांत्रिक देशों के बीच मजबूत जुड़ाव को भी दर्शाता है। माननीय सदस्यों को भारत के ऊर्जा स्रोतों से संबंधित उन मुद्दों की जानकारी होगी जो इस समझौते पर हुई चर्चाओं के दौरान उठाए गए। मैं स्पष्ट करना चाहता हूं, जैसा कि सरकार ने कई बार सार्वजनिक रूप से कहा है कि 140 करोड़ भारतीयों की ऊर्जा आवश्यकताओं की सुरक्षा सुनिश्चित करना सरकार की सर्वोत्तम प्राथमिकता है। वस्तुनिष्ठ बाजार स्थितियों और बदलते अंतर्राष्ट्रीय परिदृश्यों के अनुरूप ऊर्जा स्रोतों में विविधता लाना हमारी इस कार्यनीति का मूल आधार है। भारत की सभी कार्रवाइयां इसी बात को ध्यान में रखकर की जाती है। अतः मैं माननीय सदस्यों से इन मुद्दों को समुचित दृष्टिकोण से देखने का आग्रह करता हूं। दोनों देशों के बीच भावी व्यापार अवसरों के संदर्भ में माननीय सदस्यगण इस बात को समझेंगे कि भारत और अमेरिका काफी हद तक एक दूसरे की पूरक अर्थव्यवस्थाएं हैं। जैसे जैसे भारत विकसित भारत के पथ पर अग्रसर हो रहा है, हमें ऊर्जा, विमानन, डेटा केंद्र, परमाणु ऊर्जा आदि सहित कई क्षेत्रों में अपनी क्षमताओं को बढ़ाने की आवश्यकता होगी। अमेरिका इन क्षेत्रों में दुनिया का अग्रणी देश है, इसलिए हमारे लिए इन क्षेत्रों में व्यापार की संभावनाओं पर ध्यान केंद्रित करना स्वाभाविक है, जिससे न केवल हमारी खरीद में बल्कि हमारे अपने निर्यात में भी विस्तार होगा।
And Piyush Goyal, the Commerce Minister, will be with us today at the NDTV Profit Conclave. That's later on today. So we will be broadcasting what he says. It comes on a day in which this landmark India-US trade deal, the joint statement, has now come out. But let's go back to Ronak Desai, who joins us as well at this stage. You know, Ronak, I was going through some of the fine print, and there are lots of aspects in this deal which are quite interesting. For example, aligning standards and accelerating exports. So, you know, in specific terms, if there is a trade deal between two countries which didn't have a trade deal in this manner, it helps avoid repetitive testing and certifications for our exporters, which is absolutely huge because that's very expensive and time consuming across industries. It lowers costs and time for Indian goods to enter the US market. It supports Indian MSMEs integrate into global value chains. It helps Indian goods meet global standards, and therefore it brings down costs for consumers. So just in terms of integrating India's economy with America's in a bigger deal through this trade deal, you know, it's a trade deal isn't just about I'm buying A and I'm exporting B. It's about systems, right? And I suppose that's also critical.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And look, this is less about one tariff number. And as you rightfully point out, Vishnu, this is about market access. This is about standards. This is about non-tariff barriers. They've expressly mentioned medical devices, ITC, licensing, testing standards, and it's explicitly linking trade to economic security alignment, right? Export controls, supply chain resilience. Ultimately, what both countries are saying is that trade policy is part of broader national security. It's part of global security. These two countries need to go forward hand in hand, integrate with each other more comprehensively, harmonize their different standards, ensure that market access is based on equity, because ultimately there's a larger constellation of interests that both countries need to be pursuing, and those are ultimately in the national security domain, right? As these two countries, these two nations are looking at the global architecture of trade, especially with the unique vision that President Trump has brought to the White House upon his return to the presidency, it's meant to be a very powerful signaling mechanism to the rest of the world that after decades of friction, after decades of trade irritants that have really afflicted the two countries, that the United States and India are now resetting relations in this very important arena. They're now willing to move forward, and they're essentially putting the world on notice that there's going to be potentially a new era being undertaken by the United States and India that see as a congruence of values, but also a congruence of interests, especially now in the economic domain.
There's also the joint technology cooperation aspect of this, Aditya, which positions India as a hub for AI, data, and digital services. That $500 billion mark, which India was supposed to get in trade from the US, a large part of that would be from this and defense, right?
Well, that's right. 500 billion when initially came in sent in a huge shockwave. How was this going to happen? But certainly this is part of the joint statement as well. There are some significant sectors that are mentioned and a timeline of the next 5 years. Technology and artificial intelligence play a very significant role in that. Mind you, India is going to host in a few days from now the Artificial Intelligence Summit, where global leaders from close to 100 countries would be participating, including the French President Macron. You remember Prime Minister Narendra Modi, I believe, last year was jointly hosting a similar AI summit there. But currently on NDTV, we'll be keeping a very close watch on the latest developments, even as the big headline is the joint statement on India-US trade deal.
All right. Well, thank you, Ronak and Aditya, for being with us. We're going to take a short break at this stage, continue to track this huge story. Once again, Piyush Goyal, the Commerce Minister, will be on NDTV today at the NDTV Profit Conclave. It comes on a day when this landmark trade deal, the details are being specified in that joint statement which has now emerged. There's still some work to be done, but it is a huge deal one way or the other. We'll take a short break. More coming up.